My name is Clara, and for most of my 32 years, I have been a creature of habit and quiet responsibility. I live in a city called Oakhaven, a place of settled avenues and old trees that shed their leaves in a predictable, rust-colored carpet each autumn. My life, much like my city, has been built on a foundation of steadiness. I work as a data analyst for a small firm, Starlight Analytics, where my days are measured in spreadsheets and patterns, a comforting world of logic and order. This order was my sanctuary, a stark contrast to the gentle, persistent chaos of my family life. Our home, a two-story colonial that had been in my father's family for generations, was a place I both loved and felt trapped by. It smelled of my mother's lavender fabric softener and the faint, lingering scent of my father's pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked in years. It was a house of memories, but lately, the memories felt less like warm blankets and more like heavy chains. I was the anchor of this family, the one who paid the mortgage, stocked the pantry, and ensured the lights stayed on. It was a role I had slipped into so gradually, I hadn't realized how much it was costing me, not in money, but in spirit. I was standing at the kitchen sink, the warm water a comfort against my skin as I rinsed a ceramic bowl. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a thousand tiny, unsettled things. Outside, the world was peaceful. Inside, a familiar tension simmered just beneath the surface of our quiet domesticity. That's when my mother spoke. Her voice was as smooth and placid as the surface of a still pond. "We're out of the Serenity Blend tea again, dear," she said, her focus on the grocery list she was meticulously crafting at the oak table. "Could you pick some up on your way home from work tomorrow?" I didn't turn around. I carefully placed the bowl in the dish rack, the soft clink the only sound for a moment. "Is the tea for your nerves, Mom?" I asked, my voice even, "or is it for Sophie and her holistic wellness journey?" My mother didn't so much as flicker. A laugh would have been too honest an emotion for this kitchen. "It's for her," she said, folding the list with the precision of a cartographer mapping a known world. "She needs to be well rested before her flight." I stopped my movements, the water still running over my hands. A drop slid from my fingertip and fell into the sudsy water below, a tiny disruption. "What flight?" "To Porto Covo," she answered, as if I'd missed a key piece of family news we'd all discussed. "Didn't she tell you?" There was a beat of silence, just long enough to feel deliberate. "It's for her wellness retreat. In Portugal. The sea air is meant to be very restorative for one's vital energies." The water felt suddenly cold. My hands, submerged, were numb. I turned the faucet off and slowly turned to face her, wiping my hands on a worn dish towel. "She's going to Portugal?" Mom blinked, her expression one of mild surprise, as if I'd asked a question with an obvious answer. "Just for a week or so. It's a very exclusive sanctuary. All organic, very mindful. She's been under a great deal of stress, Clara." I simply stared at her, letting the words hang in the air between us. Portugal. A sanctuary. Mindful. Stressed. That was the word she chose. Not unemployed for the better part of 2 years, not living off my salary, not the reason I worked overtime every other week to cover the mortgage, the utilities, the car insurance, and now, apparently, the Serenity Blend tea. All in service of Sophie's restoration in Portugal. How is she paying for it? My voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "She won it," Mom replied, a little too quickly. "It was a prize. One of those influencer giveaways on social media." "Of course," I said, the words feeling heavy and foreign in my mouth. "She won a trip to a wellness sanctuary in Portugal from a social media influencer." "Yes," Mom affirmed, her gaze unwavering. Then, after a moment, she added, a note of gentle admonishment in her tone, "You shouldn't sound so skeptical, Clara. She deserves something beautiful in her life." I dried my hands, my grandmother's silver ring catching on a thread of the towel. I looked at her, my own mother, and a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. When I was promoted to senior analyst last year, Do you remember what you said to me? I paused. You said, "That's lovely, dear." And then you asked if my raise would be enough to cover the increase in the property taxes. That was it. My mother's calm facade cracked, just a little. A faint flush rose on her cheeks. That's not a fair comparison, she said, her voice tight. No, I agreed softly. It isn't. Just then, the telltale jingle of keys sounded from the hallway, and Sophie breezed into the kitchen as if stepping onto a brightly lit stage. She was radiant, exuding an energy that seemed to draw all the light in the room to her. She wore a stylish trench coat, the one I had given her for her birthday, the one she'd claimed was a bit too classic for her tastes, but now wore with an effortless glamour. The reality of it all struck me then, a cold, hard certainty. She was really going. She drifted to the refrigerator, pulling the door open with a proprietary air. Is there any of that almond milk left? She asked, not to me, but to the room at large. I remained silent. My mother, ever the facilitator, handed her the neatly folded grocery list. Clara is picking some up tomorrow. Sophie graced our mother with a dazzling smile and a light kiss on the cheek. Thanks, sis, she chirped in my general direction, her eyes already scanning her phone. Then, just as quickly as she had arrived, she was gone, the front door closing with a soft click behind her, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and silence. The quiet that descended on the kitchen felt different now, heavier, weighted with all the things I wasn't saying. I thought she was broke, I said finally, my voice flat. She needed this trip, Mom said, her tone defensive. You have no idea how difficult it is for her, being at home, all the time, feeling so aimless. I didn't argue. I turned back to the sink, the last of the suds spiraling down the drain. Deep down, a place I rarely visited, I knew this wasn't just about the trip or the tea. It was a symptom of a much deeper imbalance, a sickness in the very foundation of our family. For years, I had papered over the cracks, painted the walls, and pretended the house was sound. I just hadn't been ready to admit the rot went all the way to the beams. Not yet. But that was about to change. That evening, after the house had settled into its usual quiet rhythm, I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt conspiratorial in the dim light of my bedroom. On a whim, I typed Azure Cliff Wellness Sanctuary Giveaway into the search bar. I scrolled through pages of sponsored posts, glossy influencer photos, and booking sites. There was no mention of a giveaway. Not a single one. I wasn't surprised. A part of me, the logical, analytical part that I relied on at work, had already concluded it was a fabrication. The following evening, over a dinner of takeout Thai food that I had picked up, I decided to probe again, gently. My mother was arranging the basil leaves on her pad CEW as if it were a delicate work of art, a small act of control in a world that was slipping from her grasp. So, which influencer was it that ran the contest for Sophie's trip? I asked, my tone light, conversational. Mom paused, her fork hovering midair. She stared at the container of peanut sauce as if it held the secrets of the universe. Oh, just some travel blogger, she said vaguely. You know Sophie. She's always entering those things. She's so lucky. I took a bite of my curry, the heat of it a dull burn. I chewed slowly, deliberately. That's odd, I mused. She usually can't wait to broadcast her wins all over her social media. A trip to Portugal seems like something she'd be shouting from the rooftops. My mother's eyes darted to mine. Perhaps she didn't want to make you feel bad, she suggested, her voice softening into a performance of concern. She knows how hard you've been working. It was a novel concept, my family considering my feelings. I'm not upset, I said, and it was true. I wasn't upset. I was tired. A profound, bone-deep exhaustion had settled over me. I was tired of being the silent, reliable engine that powered the lives of others, an engine no one ever thought to check until it sputtered to a halt. The next morning, I was in a quarterly budget meeting, staring at a pie chart when my phone vibrated on the table. A number I didn't recognize with a foreign country code. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, my work phone rang. It was from our corporate office. I excused myself, a knot tightening in my stomach. It was a relay call from a company called Meridian Trust. "This is Marcus from Meridian Trust," a man's voice said, crisp and professional. "We're conducting a routine security check regarding some recent activity on your primary credit account." I stepped into the quiet of an empty corridor, the hushed office noise a distant murmur. "What sort of activity?" I asked, my own voice sounding strangely distant. "We flagged a series of high-value transactions originating from Porto Covo, Portugal, over the last 4 days," he explained. "Charges include a boutique hotel, several high-end restaurants, and a private yacht charter. We're calling to verify that you are, in fact, traveling internationally." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. The city's skyline blurred. "No," I said, the word barely a breath. "I'm not." There was a pause, filled with the sterile hum of a long-distance connection. "In that case, ma'am, I would strongly recommend we freeze the card immediately." "Yes," I said, the single word feeling like the first solid ground I'd stood on in days. "Please. Do it now." In just 4 days, Sophie had spent over 25,000 euros. It was a sum so staggering it felt unreal. The representative emailed me a detailed, itemized list of the charges. The Azure Cliff Wellness Sanctuary, a tasting menu at a 2-Michelin-star restaurant, a private fado music session, a shopping spree at a designer boutique. The list went on. I forwarded the email to my personal account, and when I got home that evening, I printed all 5 pages. I laid them on the kitchen table, right where my mother read her morning paper, a stark black and white testament to my sister's holiday. I didn't say a word. That evening, the silence in the house was different. It was thick and heavy, charged with unspoken words. My mother was folding laundry with an unnerving precision, her knuckles white as she creased the edges of a pillowcase. My father, a man who usually communicated only in grunts during the evening news, cleared his throat. "She didn't mean any harm by it, Clara," he said, his eyes fixed on the television screen. I didn't reply. "The card was just in your desk drawer," my mother added, her voice carefully neutral. "You always leave it there. It's not as if she stole it from your purse." I picked up the top page of the printout and held it up. The number at the bottom was stark. 25,000 euros. In 4 days. "She said she was worried the travel points were going to expire," my mother said, her explanation so flimsy it was almost insulting. "She didn't want them to go to waste." I looked at her, truly looked at her. "She actually said that?" My mother's gaze faltered. "Words to that effect." I said nothing more. I gathered the papers and went upstairs to my room. Later, I checked my phone. A voicemail from Sophie had come in. Her voice was bright, musical, and utterly oblivious. "Hey, sis. So, weird thing, the card seems to have stopped working. Could you give the bank a call and sort it out? I was about to book this amazing Cork forest tour. Love you." She hung up before the automated voice could even begin. I didn't inform my parents that I'd frozen the account. They discovered it the next morning when Sophie called, her voice no longer musical. My mother was in the living room, cradling a mug with the words "Choose Joy" printed on it. "She says her card was declined at breakfast," Mom said, holding the phone away from her ear as if it were hot. I looked up from my laptop, where I was reviewing my own decimated finances. "Yes," I said calmly. "It was." My mother's eyes narrowed. "You canceled it." I reported it stolen. I corrected her gently. From his armchair, my father spoke. "That seems a bit drastic, don't you think? She took my property without permission and used it to defraud me of a significant amount of money," I replied, the words clinical and precise. "The legal term for that is theft, Dad." My mother's voice rose, losing its carefully constructed calm. "You always have to take things to the extreme, Clara." Sophie called my phone next. I watched her name flash on the screen and let it go to voicemail. "Seriously, Clara?" Her message began, the cheerfulness replaced by a petulant whine. You actually canceled the card? I have reservations. This is so incredibly childish. I was even going to bring you back a souvenir. That last part, the promise of a cheap trinket, was so absurd it almost made me laugh. It was a laugh that held no humor, only a hollow sort of despair. Later that afternoon, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years. My family didn't knock. We need to talk, my mother said, her voice strained. I closed my laptop. She entered and sat on the edge of my armchair, an unwelcome guest in my private space. She's stranded, Clara, Mom began, her tone a blend of accusation and appeal. She's at this 5-star resort with no way to pay her bill. She can't even buy a meal. She had the Ocean's Bounty seafood platter for dinner last night. I countered, the memory of the line item on the statement fresh in my mind. It cost 150 euros. She's your sister, my mother insisted, as if that 2-word phrase was a magical incantation that absolved all sins and erased all debts. It was the story of my life. She's your sister. Family is all we have. The older sister is the safety net. I sat up straighter, a new kind of resolve solidifying within me. Do you remember when I was in my first year of university? I asked, my voice steady. When I was working 2 jobs and taking a full course load, and I developed a bleeding ulcer from the stress? Mom looked away, toward the window. Must you bring that up now? I called you, crying, I continued, my voice unwavering. I was in the student health center, and I had a medical bill I couldn't pay. It was a few $100s. I let the silence stretch. You told me you were sorry, but Sophie's orthodontist appointment was that week, and her braces were more important. My mother pressed her lips together, her hands twisting in her lap. That was a different situation. It was always a different situation, I said quietly. In that moment, she looked her age. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper, etched not just by time, but by the long, exhausting work of maintaining a fiction. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out, her hand cool and hesitant, and placed it on mine. I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I know we haven't always been fair to you. But she is in real trouble right now, Clara. She needs you. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't offer any comfort either. I thought of Sophie's entitled voicemail, the casual command to sort it out, as if I were her personal assistant. And I had a moment of startling clarity. Sophie didn't believe she had done anything wrong. And my mother, deep down, probably agreed with her. A flood of memories washed over me. My 17th birthday, when Sophie, who was 15, was given a used car, and I was given a savings bond for college. The equal, proud smiles on my parents' faces as if the gifts were perfectly balanced. The time Sophie borrowed $200 of my savings, money I'd earned tutoring, to invest in a friend's startup, only for me to see photos of her at a music festival a week later. And then, the biggest memory of all, the house. The deed was tucked away in a file cabinet in my closet. My father had signed it over to me 5 years ago when the bank was threatening foreclosure. He couldn't make the payments. His small pension was not enough. The deal was unspoken but clear. I would assume the debt and the bills, and the house would be mine. And I'd paid every bill, every tax assessment, every mortgage payment, quietly and on time. I thought about all of this, the slow accumulation of 1,000 tiny injustices, and a strange calm settled over me. I looked at my mother and offered her a small, enigmatic smile. Okay, I said. She looked up, startled. Then a wave of relief washed over her face. You'll help her. I stood and walked to my dresser. From the back of the top drawer, I retrieved a slim black envelope. Inside was a credit card, pristine and unused. This one is active, I said, handing it to her. Tell her to use it for her flight home and to settle the hotel bill. She took it from me like a holy relic, her eyes shining with gratitude. It was, for her, a restoration of the natural order. I watched her leave my room, clutching the card as if it were the solution to everything. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Hi, Grandma," I said, my voice clear and steady. I was wondering if the offer to help out in the cafe kitchen was still open. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. The frantic calls from Sophie ceased. After one final, clipped voicemail in which she sullenly confirmed the new card was working, there was only silence. My mother began to move through the house with a softer tread, her commands replaced by hesitant requests. She offered to make me tea. She asked about my day at work and almost listened to the answer. It was a change, a temporary truce in a war I was only just beginning to realize I had been fighting alone for years. And me? I played my part. I nodded. I smiled. I handed over the black card. The gold card, my primary account, was gone for good, a casualty of the battle. The black card was different. It was an old supplementary card on an account Sophie herself had opened 3 years prior during a brief, misguided attempt to become a freelance graphic designer. She had used it once, then forgotten it in a drawer, along with her artistic ambitions. I had found it months ago while cleaning. I activated it and gave it to my mother. "She still has to cover the flight and the outstanding bill," I said calmly. "This should be enough." My mother, so relieved to have the crisis averted, didn't question it. She didn't ask why I had this card or why I was suddenly so compliant. She simply accepted it, believing the old dynamics had clicked back into place. But the game had changed. I was no longer playing by her rules. The next evening, I received a text from Sophie. "Card worked. Tea checks. You're a lifesaver. Bringing you back some artisanal sea salt." I didn't reply. Instead, I began to pack. For sturdy boxes. I took only what was truly mine, what held meaning: my books, my professional documents, the quilt my grandmother had made me for my college graduation, the small collection of photos that captured moments of my own life, separate from them. The rest was just furniture. Then I went online and arranged for a small moving company to come the following Tuesday. The next morning, I called a realtor named Judith. We had met at a networking event years ago, and I remembered her as being sharp and efficient. To my relief, she remembered me. When I told her which house I was calling about, she was immediately interested. I explained the situation simply. The house was in my name, I was the sole owner on the deed, and I intended to have it vacant by the middle of the following week. She told me she had a young family who had been looking for a house on our street for over a year. We scheduled a walkthrough for that afternoon. I went into my closet and pulled out the old file folder where I kept the house documents. The deed transfer, the tax records, the mortgage statements. The folder was still labeled Household Bills. I had never even bothered to give it a more permanent name. In the hallway, I paused by a framed family photograph from a Christmas 7 years ago. We were all there, smiling for the camera. Except, I wasn't really. I was on the very edge of the frame, my shoulder and half my face cropped out to better center Sophie and my parents. It used to make my heart ache. Now, it just looked accurate. I had never truly been in the picture, just holding up the edge of the frame. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I left a spare key under a loose stone by the back porch for the movers. I labeled my boxes with a black marker, Clara, apartment. Then I got in my car and drove across town. I drove to my grandmother's house. She lived in a small brick bungalow behind the cafe she'd owned and operated for 40 years. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been expecting me. She didn't ask for explanations. She simply looked at me, her eyes clear and knowing, and gave a small, decisive nod. "The upstairs apartment has been empty for a month," she said, her voice raspy from a lifetime of calling out orders over the sizzle of a hot grill. "There's peace and quiet, and I don't tolerate drama." I felt a genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "That sounds perfect, Grandma." The air inside smelled of yeast, garlic, and freshly brewed coffee. Her world was one of purpose and hard work. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked me squarely in the eye. Are you ready for what comes next? I don't know, I admitted honestly, but I'm ready to find out. She nodded again, a flicker of something pride, perhaps, in her eyes. They'll come looking for you, she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. And I knew she was right. They returned on a Saturday. The sky was a watercolor wash of gray and blue. I heard the rattle of suitcase wheels on the flagstone path before I saw them. I wasn't in the house. I was sitting on the porch swing, a mug of my grandmother's strong coffee in my hands, waiting. Sophie saw me first, her face breaking into a wide, relieved smile. Clara, you came to welcome us home, she exclaimed, dropping her bags. I said nothing. My father, looking weary from the travel, began to carry the luggage up the steps. My mother followed, fishing in her purse for her keys. She inserted her key into the lock of the front door. It didn't turn. She jiggled it, then tried again. Nothing. A frown creased her forehead. She looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Did you change the code on the keypad? No, I said, my voice even. I changed the locks. She blinked, confused. But why? Because you don't live here anymore. A short, disbelieving laugh escaped her. Don't be ridiculous, Clara. I set my mug down and rose from the swing. I walked down the steps and stood before them on the path. From my coat pocket, I pulled a large manila envelope and handed it to my father. Inside were the signed, notarized closing documents for the sale of the house, a copy of the wire transfer to my bank account, and a letter from the new owner's attorney. Judith, my realtor, had been as good as her word. The sale had closed yesterday. The new family was moving in on Monday. I sold it, I said simply. Sophie's smile vanished. Sold what? The house. Her face contorted with disbelief, then anger. You can't do that, she shouted, her voice shrill. That's illegal. This is our family home. It's Dad's house. My father, his hands trembling slightly, tore open the envelope. He stared at the first page, his face draining of all color. He didn't need to read further. He sank down onto the edge of the brick planter, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Dad, I said, my voice gentle but firm. You signed the deed over to me 5 years ago. Do you remember? When the bank sent the final notice. He opened his mouth, then closed it, the memory undeniable. He said nothing. My mother's voice was sharp as broken glass. You had no right. I met her gaze, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt no fear, no need to placate her. I had every right, I said. I paid the back taxes that you ignored. I paid the mortgage every month for 62 months. I paid for the new roof when it leaked, the new furnace when the old one died in the middle of winter. I kept this roof over your heads. You just lived under it. Sophie stepped toward me, her hands on her hips. So, what are we supposed to do now? Where are we supposed to go? I held out a second envelope, this one addressed to her. She snatched it from my hand and ripped it open. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note on my grandmother's cafe stationery. The note said, 2 rooms upstairs are clean. Your first shift starts Monday at 6 a.m. Aprons are by the door. My mother peered at the note, her expression one of utter bewilderment. You sent our things to your grandmother's? No, I corrected her. I sent your things to your mother's house. She has agreed to let you stay on the condition that you all work in the cafe to earn your keep. Sophie scoffed, as if I'm going to take orders from Grandma. She's been running her own successful business since before you were born, I replied coolly. You might learn something. It was my father who spoke next, his voice raspy. And the credit card? He asked, looking up from the documents. The black one. I turned to him. Which one? The one Sophie used to come home, he clarified. Oh, that one, I said. That wasn't my card. Sophie froze. What are you talking about? Of course it was your card. No, I said, looking directly at her, letting the final piece of the puzzle click into place. It was yours. From that freelance design account you opened 3 years ago. You just never used it. I found it in your old desk. Her face went slack with comprehension. I never activated it. You did now, I said softly. She looked down at the key in her hand, then back at me, the full weight of her own choices finally landing on her. You're lying, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. I didn't need to respond. At that moment, a moving van, not mine, but a much larger one, rumbled down the street and pulled into the driveway. A car followed behind it, and a young couple got out, the woman holding a baby carrier, a small, joyful terrier bouncing on a leash beside them. They looked at the house, their faces filled with hope and excitement. They were starting their life here. I turned back to my family, 3 stunned figures on the lawn of a house that was no longer theirs. The movers will have the last of your things at Grandma's by tomorrow afternoon, I said. You should probably go. My mother opened her mouth, a torrent of words no doubt ready to spill out, but for once, none came. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I walked to my car, which I had parked down the street, got in, and drove away without looking back. There were no grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. The house was already a part of my past, and now so were they. In the aftermath, a profound quiet settled over my life. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment on the far side of town, in a neighborhood with no memories. It was a simple space, a bedroom, a living room, a small kitchen with a window that looked out onto a shared garden. It was the first place that had ever been entirely mine. And it was quiet. The kind of deep, restorative silence you don't realize you're starving for until you're immersed in it. At work, my focus sharpened. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my lifelong companion faded away. I no longer felt a jolt of panic every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I started buying fresh flowers for my kitchen table, not for an occasion, but simply because their color and fragrance brought me a quiet pleasure. One Tuesday morning, my grandmother called. She never wasted time on pleasantries. They're adjusting, she said, her voice gravelly. I knew who they were. Your mother is learning to properly sanitize the dishes, though she moves slower than molasses in January. Your father has discovered a surprising talent for folding napkins into fancy swans. And your sister, she paused, and I could almost hear her wry smile. She finally learned how to use the time clock. Only took her 3 tries. I listened, saying nothing. My grandmother sighed, a sound like rustling leaves. They're not happy about it. But they're learning. Some lessons can only be learned with chapped hands and an early alarm clock. That night I lay awake, not with guilt or anger, but with a strange new feeling. It felt like I had finally set down a heavy, invisible weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. A few weeks later, I found myself in my grandmother's neighborhood. On an impulse, I parked my car and walked toward the cafe. I didn't intend to go in. I just wanted to see. The back door was propped open, and the warm, familiar sense of garlic, baking bread, and roasting coffee spilled out into the cool air. I stood across the narrow alley, partially hidden by a trellis of climbing roses, and looked through the kitchen window. And I saw them. Sophie stood at a stainless steel counter, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her expression one of intense concentration as she chopped onions. My father was at the large sink, meticulously washing pots, his movements slow but steady. And my mother, her face set in a line of grim determination, was kneading a large mound of dough, her hands dusted with flour. None of them looked up. None of them saw me. I watched them for a long time, feeling a sense of detachment that was neither cold nor warm. It was simply clear. They were no longer my responsibility. They were 3 people learning, for the first time, to carry their own weight. No one was reaching out, expecting me to save them. I turned and walked back to my car. A week later, a letter arrived. The envelope was addressed to me in my mother's elegant, looping cursive. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written on it. You were right. I just never wanted you to be. There was no apology, no excuse, no plea. But it was an admission. It was the truth. It was enough. I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box where I kept a few important things: my university diploma, a faded photograph of me and my grandmother, and the final paid-in-full notice for the mortgage on the old house. I closed the lid and put the box on a high shelf in my closet. The months turned into a year. The seasons in Oakhaven changed, the old trees shedding and renewing themselves as they always did. I heard snippets of news through my grandmother. Sophie had taken a second job waiting tables at night. My father had fixed the persistent leak in the cafe's walk-in refrigerator. My mother had started baking pies for the dessert menu, and they were, to everyone's surprise, incredibly popular. I felt no great surge of emotion at this news, only a quiet acknowledgement, like feeling the ground beneath your feet finally settle after a long tremor. One afternoon, my walk took me down my old street. The house had been painted a soft sage green. Cheerful yellow flowers bloomed in the window boxes. A bright red tricycle was parked jauntily in the driveway. I didn't slow down. I didn't feel a pang of loss or a surge of victory, because this was never a story about winning or about getting even. It was a story about choosing to leave the stage before the final, crushing act. It was about learning that self-respect is not a gift someone gives you, but a boundary you build, brick by quiet brick, until you have created a place where you can finally, safely live.